Repeat Gyno-Curious listeners know that I like to end most of my shows asking my guests about what gives them pleasure. I do this for a variety of reasons. I want us to end our conversation speaking about something positive so that we can both experience, although momentarily, a surge of the feel-good hormones like dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. But I also endeavor to normalize conversations about pleasure, hoping that we all incorporate not only talking about what gives us joy, but adding these pleasures to our lives with more frequency and regularity. These pleasures can be as simple as a delicious spoonful of ice cream, a visit to an art gallery, a swim in the ocean, a walk in the woods. It is good for our bodies and our soul to have even a brief bit of these pleasures to take us out of our daily stressors. Please give it a try. Take a hike in the mountains, create a delicious meal, spend an afternoon with your women friends, and find time for intimacy in all of its versions. Enjoy your pleasures, shame-free and with abandon. Welcome to Gyno-Curious. I'm your host and creator, Dr. Amy Novatt. From both sides of the speculum, we are here to investigate what it means to be a healer and to be healed. Please follow, share, and rate the show. And if you have any questions or concerns, please write to comments@radiofreerhinecliff.org. Today's guest is Rachel Blume. Rachel is a writer out of Alaska, finishing up, as she puts it, quote, the last bits of my master's degree. She writes a great deal on the environment, but also teaches writing to others. She has earned the Karchmer Prize in Fiction and was a guest at the Story Knife Writers Retreat in Homer, Alaska, a literary nonprofit that offers writer residencies specifically for women, providing a space and time for writers to focus on their craft. Rachel, welcome to the show, all the way from Alaska.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to be here. I'm actually from Fairbanks, which is interior Alaska. So if anyone has seen the show Molly of Denali, which just won an award, it's around that area.
Great. So I want to remind the listeners, particularly today, that this is a show for fun and learning. What we chat about today may not feel like part of my usual wheelhouse, but I've just felt compelled to invite Rachel here today to talk about pleasure in other animal species and how they relate to our own experiences. So I hope our conversation makes you laugh and please enjoy. So Rachel, have you always wanted to be a writer?
Yeah, I was a young kid and I was reading newspapers, and I remember like sitting in the front seat of my parents' car. And as I was reading to them, they would say, well, what do you think about that story or that article or whatever you're reading? Usually to keep me entertained. But I kept thinking to myself, well, I wonder what happened from this person's perspective, or I wonder what was going on, in the same city, just, in another group of people. And so I started writing on my own some of those stories. And so now that I'm starting to combine a little bit more about the environment and people and starting to put a lot of those things together. So I've always wanted to be a writer, but now I've put that into more of a professional practice.
Wonderful. And why are you in Alaska?
I'm in Alaska because I've always wanted to be here.
Good for you.
I graduated with my bachelor's in 2016 in Houston. And in 2015, right before I was graduating, I thought to myself, I think I want to go and get a master's degree in this. And I got everything ready to send my application to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I had seen their literary journal and thought, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be a part of. And it just wasn't the right time for me to go. I really hadn't lived enough experience to be able to write about some of those things. I was still really, really young. So I went ahead and I waited. I waited about 7 years before applying, same place. And now here I am. And I'm graduating with my master's degree. I applied for PhD programs and I was accepted to a few. So I'm still deciding where I want to go for a doctoral program in fiction. But I made it happen. And what's so fascinating is I had that literary journal, the first one I ever read. It's on my bookshelf. And I just picked up like a week and a half ago, the most recent edition that we have. And my name is in it as the fiction editor. So it was really wonderful to have both of those.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I can't imagine, but please correct me if I'm wrong, that the amazing geography and topography terrain of Alaska, it must inform you not only as a person, but in your writing, does it?
Yeah. I've written quite a bit about Alaska, but I feel like I'm still really in it and still processing it. So there's a lot about Alaska that I haven't published yet. I've done some flash creative nonfiction about Alaska. I published in Edinburgh for like a little piece of flash nonfiction about living in Alaska. But I think more of my Alaska essays will come out probably after I've had time to sit through them and think about it a little bit more. I think the thing that's really the most fascinating is how diverse Alaska is. Not only do we have, these really wide tundra areas, where there's just dog mushing and sledding and stuff like that. We just had the Iditarod race that started here. But if you drive hours and hours, you can get to the coast and then you've got otters and orcas and whales and lots of other things. So you're not really missing anything. You have all the different types of geography here
Great. Well, that must spark the imagination, I imagine.
all the time.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so we're going to move to sex. Biologically, sexual reproduction is defined as a process by which two organisms of differing sexes combine genetic information to create new offspring. But in cetaceans or aquatic mammals, the story of sex doesn't end with this kind of biological definition. In fact, some scientists are suggesting it's kind of just the beginning of their reproductive experience. Which brings me to a piece that you wrote, where you investigated how scientists have observed behaviors in whale species to suggest they seek pleasure and have erogenous zones. Can you talk about the footage of the female humpback whale and their partners' blowholes that you write this story about?
I love this. I am so excited to talk about whales and whale vaginas and whale clitorises. I'm here for it. So there was this fantastic footage that was captured of this female whale, and she has these male partners that are with her, potentially courting her, and she's resting her vaginal area over these bubbles that her partners are blowing up. And she's, tilting her tail out of the way, trying to get more access here. She is really going to town. And somebody said, there was this response from cytologists who study whales, and they were like, well, we can't really verify what she's doing. Maybe she was pregnant and she needed to start that road to labor. And I feel like nobody is having the conversation, well, maybe she just did it because it felt good, like we do. But it's really beautiful, and there's a lot of different footage of whales in courtships and sexually what they're kind of doing with each other.
It's great. I like the inquiry I had as I read about this is, oh, is this self-pleasure? Is this foreplay? Is this a mating ritual that just has not been observed in the wild before? And I had also read, about this concept of maybe it was a way in which to stimulate late-term pregnancies into labor, which I thought was just a little too much in the, how do I put this? A way of avoiding talking about self-pleasure or pleasuring in the other animal species. Yeah, it's funny. So, I guess we have to talk anatomy and particularly the clitoris. For so long, the narrative in heterosexual human sex was that the only way to reach orgasm was with penile penetration. Well, guess what? That turns out to be incorrect. According to studies, about approximately 20 to 30% of women report experiencing orgasm solely from penetration, but the majority of women require additional stimulation, in fact, clitoral stimulation. And I know that you've done some investigations into kind of the female clitoris. Can you talk to us about what you've learned?
Yes. So the female clitoris is really fascinating. I was starting to do a bit more of a deep dive into the shape of the female clitoris when we first had that, actually anatomically drawn. What I think is really interesting is that I was 12 years old when the clitoris was drawn for the first time. That was in 2005, and it was anatomically described in full for the first time. And
And not on a personal level. You're talking about kind of at the world at large in terms of
yes, the world at large
scientific.
did not
Yeah.
have this. And so we had to wait until 2005 to have that. And then also, there were studies done on the number of nerve endings that are in a woman's clitoris, but these were done in like the 60s and 70s, and they were done on cattle. They were done on bovine nerve samples. They weren't actually done on real women, which I think is, resonant today. We're just now starting to get women into scientific studies because sometimes the women's body reacts differently than a male's body
Oh
in
no, oh no.
no, no. But now we know that, it's a lot closer to like 10 or more thousand nerve endings and not closer to like 8. So we actually have more nerve endings than we previously were publishing on bovine samples. We also now have a women's reproductive system museum. Now, I won't specifically just say vaginal, but it includes a lot of different things, which we just got within the last like 5 years that happened. And we've had the penis museum for decades. So, we're just now starting to kind of catch up on a lot of those things. And I think a lot of it is because of stigma. The stigma of talking about some of those things is starting to pull back a little bit, and we're able to go out and investigate them and learn more and write about them.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt that your generation is able to speak about sex, sexuality, anatomy, gender. I mean, all of these things in a much more fluid, open way than certainly my generation was and anything before that. Yeah. So wait, where is this vagina or female reproductive museum? Where is this?
It's actually in England, and
Uh-huh.
it began as a pop-up.
Mm-hmm.
And so originally it was just supposed to be like back in 2017, it was a UK group. They created a pop-up museum. It was dedicated to gynecological anatomy, and that was in London. However, they were way more successful than I think they thought they were going to be. So now they have this glorious museum in Bethnal Green. It is dedicated to vulvas, vaginas, and all the rest of gynecological anatomy. And so they're really doing a lot there.
That's just fantastic. I mean, I love the notion and the reality that they underestimated how many people might be interested. It's so interesting how often people forget. 51% of us humans are female, are vulva havers, and then there are people who are transitioning. I mean, there's a lot of people who are interested, right? Yeah, it's just
Oh, yeah.
incredible,
Yeah.
incredible. Do you happen to know how many nerve endings are in the head of a penis?
I don't.
So I do. I looked it up because I was curious. It's like, are we the only lucky ones, or what about them? The head of the human penis has approximately 4,000 nerve endings, less than half of the human clitoris. Right on, right
Gosh, it must
on.
be. I thought it might be 4, but I was like, I don't want to commit to that number. But darn
That's
it, yeah,
that's what I
yeah, it
read.
was right.
That's what I read. So I must admit, I
Yeah.
didn't see what date that data was based on, but let's just, I kind of like the idea that it's half the amount that we've got. So I guess, have you looked at or examined or wrote about the clitoris in other species?
So I've done a lot of various research on clitorises and other animals. I was actually around the time I was in Rhinecliff and I got a chance to meet some of your staff. I was there for the Orion Environmental Writers Workshop. So I was there
Oh,
specifically for environmental writing
great.
at the time. And I was just starting to kind of formulate out this essay. And I thought, there has to be other data on other clitorises that are out there and other vaginal things going on out there. And there's a lot. And I came across it's pretty much understood that all mammals have clitoris. And what's so fascinating is that right now we're getting that humpback whales don't have one. Well, I don't know how that can be true because humpback whales are mammals, right?
Yeah.
So if we just set that aside for just a minute, just let that sit in the back of our brain, and we look at some of the research that's been done on other animals like the death adder, it's a snake, it's a pit viper, and the death adder actually has two clitorises, and it was missed. It was missed because they thought that one of them might be an underdeveloped penis, which is hilarious
It
to
is
me.
hilarious to me too.
Yes.
Well, there is such a phenomenon as a micro penis, actually, in the human beings. And I don't know whether that phenomenon exists in other mammals, but it's usually a result of a deficiency in certain enzymes to create testosterone and the external genitalia in full growth, if you will. Particularly vis-a-vis true hermaphrodites might have what we call a micropenis. But so the snake, that's interesting. Are there other animals other than mammalian species who have clitori? Do you know
Um,
offhand?
yes.
Really?
Yeah, so I believe, let me double check very quickly.
Because we do have a way of assuming us mammals are the most evolved species, but lots of other animals have lots of very interesting body parts.
Well, the death adder is a snake, so it's not a mammal.
Right.
And it does have two clitorises, and they didn't actually know that it had any at first because hepatologists actually thought that one of them might be a scent gland and the
Mm.
other one might be an underdeveloped penis. So it actually has two. But we also know that there are hemoclitorises that are found in like lizards, crocodiles, turtles, not in birds. We know that clitorises have been documented in geckos and monitor lizards. I think birds are the only exception that don't possess a clitoris. But yeah, so there definitely are non-mammalian species that do have clitorises.
It's great. It's great. I love thinking about self pleasure or masturbation or foreplay in these other species. Because again, animal behaviorists will observe animals in the wild, all kinds of animals, and have made so many assumptions about what is the mating ritual without ever talking about, is mating ritual the same as foreplay? I'm not sure it is. And I guess I'd ask you, do you think they're the same thing?
I don't think they're the same thing. I think that, you know, you can have intercourse and you could choose a partner, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, they're that into what's going on. They've chosen a partner. I think people do that too. And to have foreplay, especially like in the case of whales, that female whale she's not engaging in actual sexual penile penetration right there. This is a male partner that is blowing bubbles up underneath her, and she is pleasuring herself to those bubbles. Is he trying to court her? Probably. But I mean, can we say for sure whether or not that whole design was specifically to get her as a partner? I I don't know. Like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
feels like two really different things.
Yeah, for me too. For me too. So, with all of this observation and writing and research, has any of this information kind of informed you about your own sexual experiences, sexuality, orgasm experiences?
Yeah. So I was thinking to myself about when my first orgasms happened. And I had had my first orgasm actually when I was 11 and a half, and it was an accident. And I went, what just happened? This is amazing. Is this recreatable? And I spent probably 4 months trying to recreate this situation that happened by accident, but I loved it. And then I started thinking about, while I was doing this essay, I started thinking about, for penile penetration, it's a low number of women who have, this amazing orgasmic experience just with penile penetration. But I've also had a G spot orgasm and it was amazing. But I was 27 when it happened. And so I got to thinking about how those two experiences were really different. One, I really worked hard to get at 27, and then the other one was a complete accident. And then I started thinking about how much easier it actually was to have a clitoral orgasm than it had been for me to have the penetrative G spot orgasm. And so for us as people to think that the only way to have an orgasm would be through penile penetration, and that's the number one way to have one, my personal experience would say that's not true. And so I also got to thinking about, self pleasure because both of those in a way happened by myself. So what other animals out there are doing this by themselves? And there's actually a lot of them. Not only do we have primate species that do this, and there's evidence they've been doing it for a very long time, but there's also dolphins that my favorite one to talk about is this male dolphin that wrapped his penis in an electric eel. And that was how he was getting off.
Well, now that is creative.
Animals, animals are a little kinky. And I feel a little bit better about my own experiences.
I love, what you're describing is the phenomenon of exploration and experimentation. And I often say to women in the office when they're struggling with their intimate lives is so much of our sexual experience is also in the head. It's about our relationship, it's our relationship with our body, it's how we think about sex when we're having it. Are we otherwise thinking about the grocery list and what we're making for dinner tomorrow night, or how distracted we are? I mean, there's no human who hasn't experienced that distraction or distractibility during lovemaking. But the beauty of self-stimulation is that you can kind of say, okay, I'm going to create the environment like this. I'm going to use that. I'm going to orchestrate it in a way that's really going to work for me. And in a way, you don't have to think about anybody else, and you can just really focus on oneself, which is, I think, a really important capacity because so many people are constantly thinking of others, particularly women. They're taking care of their children, their houses, their works, their communities, their, everything. And so taking the moment to really think about, what do I want? How do I want to experience pleasure? Taking time away from all of those stressors and finding the different creative ways to get there, get off, is so important.
Yeah, and it's amazing how like I was very vulnerable in the text below that I had written about whales,
I
that
love that
sometimes I really
title.
need to relax.
Mm-hmm.
I need to relax too. And so sometimes I'll listen to whale songs as a way to kind of relax before I, get into the groove of things or whatever. But, you know, I I think about I think about toys in self-pleasure, and sometimes they can be very intimidating. And I would encourage people not to be not intimidated by them. Your feelings are valid, whatever they are, but to be willing to at least look into it a little bit because, it offers you a much wider range, I think, of different pleasures, and you can get the experience that you want in the moment that you're wanting it. And if a male porcupine can try to get off with a stick, and male walruses, if they're allowed to suck themselves off, if they're allowed to auto fellatiate, I am allowed to get on Adam and Eve and buy something nice for myself, and so is everybody else.
Totally agree. I'm a strong believer in exploring sex toys because, again, first of all, there's so many options out there these days. I mean, wonderful, wonderful, safe options using materials that are not toxic and comfortable. And again, with or without a partner, there's different ways in which to experience pleasure and comfort and attending to your body. And if a toy can help, again, you can be in the bedroom with your partner, and if a toy can help the two of you, why not? Why not? Again, there's a whole world out there, and I know, again, women who I speak to, you're right, can get very intimidated, or they're worried if they type in Adam and Eve into their computer, then all that's going to come forward is porn. And there is some challenge with the way algorithms work, but there are some really terrific product lines out there and ways of investigating these things that can feel a bit safer. Even a local store can be so helpful.
Yeah, and sex toys, I think, really combat ideas of ableism as well. Because it's possible that you have a partner that is going through a medical crisis or is going through something, and maybe you can't be as intimate in a very like traditional Western perspective. The toys offer a way for partners to be intimate, and they don't have to worry about, trying to do it the old-fashioned way. And they can still have that sexual connection. So, if animals can do it, you can do it. And I'm not worried about it.
It's great. Thank you for bringing that in. So I want to pivot a little bit, and I want to just talk about the male lens in science. You have written, quote, somehow if men don't see something, then it doesn't exist. Apologies to our listeners. I'm not really providing the context where I read this, but somehow it feels true in so many arenas. Certainly it's true in allopathic field for centuries. But you also wrote, quote, there are things we don't know, but the unknowing is not what makes something impossible. only unobserved. Can you just elaborate a bit on these comments?
I find that in science, and I have a lot of friends that are in various scientific fields, but that there's a really strong male lens to the scientific field. So when we first see something and we go, okay, well, what is this creature? What are its habits? Where does it live? A lot of those first notes are very male centric. So they think about where is its penis? What are its territorial patterns? How does it, claim a territory? And if we were looking at that from more of a maybe a more equitable perspective, or we were looking at that even from a female centric lens, I think we would see things more like how do they experience pleasure? How are they choosing a mate? Do they even choose a mate at all? How are they raising young? We have a lot of other questions that what is the structure of this group of animals we may have found? Are they matriarchal in nature, which we know that elephants are matriarchal, and there's a lot of aquatic mammals that are matriarchal. But I think that male lens kind of puts those on the back burner. And so we see a lot of the other very traditional things first. And so some of the, like, when I was first researching these animals and what they were doing, I kept coming across for pleasure. Male walruses do this. Male penguins do this. Male, animal does this. And I thought, but what are the female animals doing? Is no one watching them? Is no one checking them out? And that ended up translating to female women's bodies because sometimes whenever I was looking through research on, sex and pleasure, I was getting a lot of what men felt, what was going on with men's bodies. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, but where are the human women that we were supposed to be looking at? And those studies came just a lot later.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've mentioned it on Gyno Curious many, many times that research is so far behind in understanding the nuances of the female body versus the male. And we have a lot to learn about both. There's no question. But in terms of direct research on females, it's really behind the times. That's for sure. Yeah. So we're coming to a close, and I just wanted to ask you mentioned that you're writing a novel, or you wrote a novel. Can you tell us a little bit about the novel so people can be on the lookout for it once it's published?
So, actually, this Friday, I'm going to be defending that novel as my
Great.
master's thesis. And it's Blackwater Wolf, and I'm hoping it'll come out. I did another podcast with another group, book publishing, and you can look my name up and it'll be there. So, this novel is set in 1990s in Kentucky, and it's between two women who form a relationship when they're teenagers. And underneath this relationship, there are various people in this town that are going missing, and they're not really picking up on that because they're teenagers. And then the story takes a break for about 15 years, and one of the women, they've had a breakup, but one of the women comes back to handle her parents' estate after her father dies. And those people are still going missing. And now a 9-year-old boy has shown up on her father's farm. And after he runs away, very afraid, into the backcountry, she has to enlist the help of her ex-girlfriend to go out there and find him. And this boy insists that there's a monster in the shadow of Black Mountain. And it turns out there is definitely something out there, but I won't spoil it for you.
Great, great. Well, best of luck. So just repeat the name of it again.
Blackwater Wolf.
Great, great, great,
And it's definitely very open about women to women pleasure.
great, great. Well, best of luck. So I like to end Gyno Curious, as I intimated earlier, with talking about pleasure. If you had to name something that gives you joy, gives you pleasure in your life, what would you say it is?
My son, he
Mm.
is 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He just turned 6, and he's on the autism spectrum. And he's very high functioning, but I always like to listen to the way that he describes his world and what he's doing. And I find a lot of joy in looking at it from his perspective. Just last night, he said to me, and he's 6 years old, but he said, talking about how ideas come to him. And he said, my mind is an infinite void, and pictures just run through it. I was like, do you know what an infinite void is? And he described it to me. So I love the way he looks at the world, and it encourages me to look at the world more brightly too.
Yeah, first of all, he sounds incredibly precocious, but there's a way in which children experience life without boundaries, and that there's a lot to be learned from that, for sure. For sure. Well, thank you. Thank you, Rachel. I'm so pleased that you were able to join me today, all the way from Alaska. Thank you. Thank you. And I also want to remind everyone to please look out for the writings by Rachel Blume, because she has a lot to say and is exploring the world in this wondrous fashion. Thank you also to my co-producers, Maddie Rosenberg, Jen Hammoud, and David Hoffman. Thank you to the Epicurean for hosting us here in Rhine Cliff, New York. We are eternally grateful. And until the next episode of Gynocurious, please be well. Listen to your instincts and intuitions. They are the greatest of teachers, not to be ignored.